Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you, the viewer out there, get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlan. I'm a Christian apologist coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. And over there on the other side of the glass is...
B.A. Thomas. How's it going?
And
Sarah Garner.
Say hi, Sarah. Hello. And Pastor Ryan McAllister, who just snuck in the room and snuck out and doesn't think I saw him. But if he watches this later, he'll know that I did. So that's okay. He didn't know we were recording. Speaking of all of that, recording, and the fact that Sarah Garner is in the background, in case you're wondering why that is, because Sarah is not normally here when we're doing this show. We talk about her a lot. She doesn't watch the show because she never responds to what we say about her. But... she is actually here today, and the reason she's actually here today is because while you're seeing this on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, if you're watching us at our usual time slot, we are actually filming this on Monday. So this is not a live show like they normally are. This is pre-recorded because I actually have a film shoot on Wednesday afternoon, and I will be offsite on location at that film shoot. Don't know for sure if I'm going to be back in time to do the show at 3, so we figured rather than take that chance, we'll pre-film one. So you are watching this still at 3. We are filming it on Monday, which means there's no live chat for today, unfortunately. So if you want to comment, we welcome your comments. We want you to comment. We want to hear what your thoughts are on our topic of discussion today. However, you can't do that and expect us to interact back and forth with you live, because while we will be talking about time today, we have not perfected the ability to communicate over time travel and backwards and forwards. So we're not actually doing this live on Wednesday. So there you go. Anyway, speaking of what our topic for today is going to be, let me tell you a little bit about how you get your topic on the air. Let's say that you have something, a question that's on your mind, something pressing on you that you want to hear us answer or respond to or elaborate on. It's a very easy way for you to do that. Go to our website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff, and on there you will find a form that you can fill out. And fill out the form with whatever your question may be. Anything about Jesus, the Bible, God, Christianity, world religions, anything along those lines that's pressing on your heart, put it in that form, submit it, and then that's one way that we get questions and topics that we will take into account and consider for future episodes of Hey, Ask Me Stuff. The other way we get questions and topics is, frankly, just through everyday life. People who walk up to us and ask us questions or things like that. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, how about this for a topic for Hey, Ask Me Stuff? Another thing we did is we actually asked my 7th grade Christian education class about some of the questions they had. And so today's topic is actually one of the questions that came from them. Now, fielding over to my illustrious associate. Illustrious, is that a good word? It's not beautiful. I know I didn't say beautiful, but you're illustrious today.
Oh, I have a light on me, so yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. That to be illuminated. But so I'm going to throw it over my illuminated and illustrious compatriot back there to tell us what is our question that we'll be talking about today.
Hold on. Okay, no, I got it.
You got it? Normally I have it for him at the top of his show notes, and I did not do that today. His show notes are just a bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
So this is a test.
Spoilers.
To see if he remembers.
Who made God?
Who made God is the question. Yes, 5 points for BA. Congratulations. We're going to be talking about who made God. Now, you also noticed that BA held up to his show notes, which tells you something else. It's a little bit different about today's show than what we've done in the past. Some of what I'm going to be talking about I felt is really easier visualized than just me telling you. So we actually do have a few slides that we're going to be putting up there. However, like I said, this is pre-recorded because, I've got the film shoot on Wednesday, but not just that. We were originally planning on recording this afternoon, but then thanks to other ministry needs that came up, we actually had to bump that up to this morning, like first thing. We did the morning announcements, a couple other things, jump right into filming this. Yeah. And so I had one criteria for the topic that was chosen for today, and that's that it had to be something I could do in my sleep, that I get asked all the time, and that I know exactly how to do with very little preparation whatsoever. But that being said, that's where we chose Who Made God. That's something that's very familiar to me, and I'll explain why in a second. But that particular topic also has some concepts that are better seen than just heard. And so BA is going to be putting up these slides. Because this was last minute, I don't want to hear any complaints about those slides look cheap and chintzy. Yes, they do, because I made them in like 5 minutes before we had to go on with the recording. So, but they are what they are, and they hopefully illustrate the point that the points that I'm trying to make. Now, I mentioned that who made God is a question that I get all the time. Here's why. Here's the context that it usually comes up in. All right. It's raised by atheists, by unbelievers, non-believers, as a response to Christianity. Christians say, obviously, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? God is the creator. God made the universe. Well, for a number of reasons, there are a number of arguments that get raised, and we'll look at one today to show why that actually has to be the case. The universe needs a maker. It needs a creator of some sort. It needs to have been made by something or someone, all right? Well, when atheists hear Christians make this claim, and they say, well, wait a minute. If the universe needs to have been made by something or someone, then why doesn't God need to be made by something or someone? And so they say, Christian, all you're doing is you're moving the inquiry up a level, all right? You're not solving anything. All you're doing is saying, well, if the universe needs to be made, well, then God needs to be made, and we still have an unanswered question, all right? And so it's meant as a response to that Christian claim. Now, that would all be well and good if the two things we're talking about were of the same category and had enough of the same characteristics that that question of who made them applies equally. But that's not the case here. Let me give what's hopefully a simple illustration to show what I'm talking about, and then we'll dive into the nitty-gritty. Let's suppose that I were to tell you that Fido is a dog, and I gave you a lot of criteria to show why I can conclude, and we have to conclude, that Fido is a dog. And it's because things like Fido has a dog's tail, Fido barks, Fido pants, all these things that I show, all the characteristics that make up a dog, and I show, look, Fido has 4 legs, Fido's furry, Fido is a dog. All right. And then you come back to me and you say, well, let's say you can say one of two things. You could say, well, why isn't Rover a dog? Well, if Rover has all those same characteristics, then your response may be well taken. Then we could say, yes, okay, Rover must be a dog as well because Rover has those same relevant characteristics that Fido does. But if instead you were to come back to me and say, why isn't Brendan Fraser a dog? And a side note, I'm saying that correctly. I don't know if you saw. Brendan Fraser just did an interview a little while ago with Adam Sandler I think it was Variety or Vanity Fair. I don't know, one of those magazines that I don't read. But it was a video interview. And he made a big point of the fact that for all these years, everyone's been saying his name wrong. Everybody's been calling him Fraser, like the TV show, the spinoff of Cheers, Brendan Fraser. He says, no, my name is not Fraser. It's Fraser, like a razor. So I just want to let you know on the very, 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 very minimal chance that Brendan Fraser is ever actually watching the show. I've been saying your name wrong all these years. I apologize. And I am using whatever small platform I have here, sir, to make sure the world knows how to properly pronounce your name. So other people, BA, you will never get it wrong again, will you?
I kind of already knew. It's not the first time he said that. It's not. He said it. Oh gosh.
He did. He said they showed an interview where he said it years ago.
Yeah, during The Mummy.
Yeah. He said it, but people still get it wrong. But I feel it this time. I feel a movement growing to say Brendan Fraser's name right.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, back to the illustration. All right. So you come to me and you say, well, how come Brendan Fraser isn't a dog? Well, I could say, well, because Brendan Fraser doesn't have all those characteristics that I just listed off that made Fido a dog. All right. And so it's not a fair comparison. A conclusion that we draw about one thing doesn't necessarily automatically mean we have to draw that same conclusion about something else unless they share the same characteristics that led us to draw that conclusion in the first place. All right. That's the situation that's going on here with this question of who made God. Let me explain to you why. Now, this is going to have a little bit of a science lesson to it, but not too much. I'm not going to make you do any labs or anything like that. All right. We're going to talk about a little man by the name of Albert Einstein. And I don't think he was very tall, was he? I think he actually was kind of a little man. I have
average height.
I have no idea.
A man at that time.
Anyway, Albert Einstein, he had a theory called relativity. Actually, he had general relativity and special relativity. He wrote a book. It's called Relativity, the Special and General Theories. All right. And the main point he was trying to make was that he hypothesized, and has since been proven to be correct, that things that make up our universe, there are 3 basic things that make up our universe: time, space, and matter. And yes, energy, but matter and energy kind of go back and forth. We get that. Okay. So time, space, and matter, all right, is what makes up our universe. And he said all three of those things are actually relative to each other. Here's the illustration. All right, BA, bring up the slide number 1 there on the screen if you can, please.
Number 1.
All right, so this beautiful little stick figure person, this is meant to illustrate a person like on a train. All right. Now let's say that you're on a train and the train is standing still, okay? And you drop a ball. All right, that's what this person is doing. They're in illustration number A, they're dropping a ball. And we were to trace the path of that ball through space. All right? Well, the pathway of that ball would be like you see in person A. It would go straight down, right? But now let's pretend that the train is moving. All right? And person B is on a train that's actually moving, and let's pretend that we are looking at person B from off the train. Like maybe there's a big giant a big giant window on the side of the train so we can see into the train, okay? So person B is moving, and now person B, while moving along the train, they drop the ball, all right? Now, from person B's perspective, how is it going to look like to them like the pathway of the ball dropped?
Oh, it went straight down.
It went straight down. It's going to look to them, they see no difference between them and person A. From their point of view, the ball falls straight down. But from our perspective, off the train, looking through the window at the train, now how does the path of the ball look like it travels? It looks like it travels in illustration B there, right? It's kind of curved down because the ball's moving forward with the train and at the same rate as the person, all right? And so the pathway that ball travels through space is relative to our position. It depends on where we are. But here's where your mind gets really blown. If I'm standing on a hillside watching that train go by, and to me it looks like that ball is going at that arcway down, am I really standing still?
Oh, no, you're not.
I'm not, am I? I mean, the Earth is rotating. It's orbiting around the sun. I mean, there's all sorts of movement. The galaxy itself is moving. Even I am in motion, all right? So there is no such thing, according to general relativity, as a fixed position, all right, or as something that's fixed. It's not. Everything is related and everything is relative to each other. So even when we're doing our mathematical formulas to figure out what's going to happen here, there, and whatever, we have to take into consideration what our perspective is, all right? Are we the person on the train or are we the person off the train, so to speak, right? All right, so that's the basic principle behind relativity, this idea of everything being related. Now, the conclusions that leads to is this relationship between time, space, and matter. And this is slide number 2, BA. So we often think of objects in our universe as occupying space, all right? So like if I got a big giant planet, then essentially there's a planet and there's all the space around it, and there's just it's moving the space, it's eliminating this. There is no space where the planet is, so to speak. It's kind of like if I were to represent space as a big sheet, all right, and then I wanted to put a hole in that space, like I use a actual bed sheet when I illustrate this in class, Okay. Do I cut and I use a bed sheet and a bowling ball. I use a bowling ball to represent the planet. How do I represent the relationship of that planet to space? Do I cut a bowling ball shaped hole in the middle of that sheet and stick that planet inside that hole? No. Instead, what general relativity tells us is that planet doesn't occupy space in that way. Mm-hmm. It actually pushes space out of its way. It kind of warps the space around it, which is also the principle for Star Trek's warp drive, but we won't go into that. Okay. I don't have that illustration up there. But what you see here in illustration number 2, it's kind of like taking one plane of space, all right, and showing how that relates to the matter that is inside it. The same amount of space actually gets stretched, gets moved, gets expanded, almost around the piece of matter that is in it. The bigger the piece of matter, the more the space gets warped, all right? And that is true of space and matter and also time. Also something that was used in Star Trek for time travel. But again, we're not going to have a Star Trek lesson today. But time itself, we think of time as being fixed. It's not. There is no such thing as fixed in general relativity. Time itself is also relative to space and to matter. All right. So when Einstein figured this all out, he came to the conclusion that it meant that the universe had to be either expanding or shrinking. It couldn't be static. There's nothing fixed, all right? It couldn't be just fixed. And this actually ran contrary to the prevailing views of his time, where everybody thought the universe was just static, was fixed. And so when he first came up with his theory, he actually created what he called the cosmological constant, which has evolved over time. There is something called a cosmological constant, but the way he did it at the time is he created this fudge factor to allow the universe to stay stable, even though all of his other calculations showed it couldn't be. All right. Well, he called that his biggest blunder later in life because, through various different discoveries later on, like something called redshift, it was discovered that no, the universe actually is expanding. It's not fixed. Just like his original calculation showed, the universe is growing and growing and growing and growing. So the space is actually expanding as we go forward in time. All right. Well, go to slide number 3.
Slide number 3.
There we go. Now, I know different Christians have different opinions about the age of the universe. I'm not going into that right now because this logic holds true whether you think the universe was created 10,000 years ago or however many years ago, all right? The fact of the matter is that if the universe is expanding at whatever rate you think it is, all right? Right now, this picture you have on the screen, imagine that this is a 2-dimensional example of a 3-dimensional reality. So just look at the circle on the end of the cone, the big circle, and pretend that is the universe today. Just that plane, just the plane, the solid surface of that circle, not the whole rest of the cone behind it, just the circle. All right, that represents the size of the universe today. But remember, we say the universe is always growing. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, then what happens if we go backwards in time? We see the universe getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it comes together at what scientists call a singularity, one single point, all right? What this illustrates, and there's all sorts of stuff about inflationary models and stuff like that, which I'm not going to go into more specifics in this right now. There's a series on our YouTube channel here called Pocket-Size Apologetics. If you're interested in more detail about all of this, you can go to that playlist, and there's a whole series on what's called the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Teaser, we're going to talk about that in a second, that goes into more detail about all these arguments and counter-arguments that you can explore there. But what this shows is the universe had a beginning. There's a singularity which marks the beginning point for the universe, all right? And this is not something, it is in the Bible, obviously, in the beginning, but I'm not getting this from the Bible right now, I'm getting it from science, all right? The universe had a beginning point, all right? This then leads into arguments for the truth of the Bible, and most well known and talked about today in this regard is the Kalam Cosmological Argument, slide number 4. All right. And here's what the Kalam Cosmological Argument says. All right. First of all, if you're not familiar with logical argumentation, they work on what's called premises and conclusions. All right. So you'll have a series of premises, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, which is basically saying these things are true. And then your argument is, if these things are all true, then the conclusion must follow. It logically has to follow, okay? So, for example, if I say all dogs are canines, that's premise 1. Premise 2, Fido is a dog, then my conclusion is Fido is a canine, right? If those first 2 premises are true, that all dogs are canines, and then Fido is a dog. Well, if all dogs are canines, it means every single dog is a canine. Fido is one of those dogs. Therefore, Fido must be a canine. All right, that's how logical arguments work. The same thing here with the Kalam Cosmological Argument. These first 2 things are the premises, and the third one is the conclusion. All right, so we start out by saying, number 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. All right. In other words, if something goes from a state of non-existence to a state of existence, something must have caused it to be that way. The simple example I give lots of times is if you walk into your kitchen one morning and you see a peanut butter and jelly sandwich sitting on the kitchen table that wasn't there the night before, you're not going to just assume that it just popped into existence arbitrarily. You're going to assume someone made it, okay? It had to have a cause. You don't walk down the road expecting an apple just to magically appear in front of your eyes, all right, unless someone threw it there. Or dropped out of a tree, all right? You assume that if something goes from a state of not existing to one of existing, that something must have caused that change to happen. That is our universal experience. Again, you go to that Pocket-Size Apologetics series if you want to hear some of the objections from quantum mechanics, which I respond to there. Things even in the quantum field still caused. Maybe unpredictable, but still caused. There's a difference. All right, so our universal experience supports premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise number 2. The universe began to exist. Well, we just showed that. That's what all that general relativity conversation was all about, right? The universe did have a beginning, all right? Well, then what follows from those two premises? If whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe is one of those things that began to exist, then we can say, therefore, the universe has a cause. Something must have caused the universe to exist. This is why we legitimately ask the question, what or who made the universe? Because we see these criteria that fit with the universe that say the universe must have a cause. All right. The question then becomes, is that true of God? All right. If everything in this Kalam cosmological argument can be said not only of the universe, but also of God, then it is a fair criticism to say, who made God? All right. If God is not properly described by everything that's in these premises of this argument, then it is not a fair criticism, just like it's not a fair criticism to ask why Brendan Fraser is not a dog. All right. So let's look at these two premises. All right. You don't need to get any further than, well, number 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. So if we were to change this argument, just so you know, for God, we would say whatever begins to exist has a cause. God began to exist, therefore God has a cause. Well, let me ask you a question. Did God begin to exist? No. All right. How do I know that? Well, the Bible says so. Well, okay, let's get past that for a second. All right. Yes, that's true. All right. But even what we've seen so far just from general relativity and science shows us that that's not the case, that whatever caused the universe itself did not have a beginning point. Why do I say that? What's a beginning point? It's a point in time. Where does time exist? In the universe, all right? That's what we just talked about with general relativity. You understand, with time, space, and matter all being related, that means as we go back in time, to that singularity point, that singularity marks the beginning not just of space and matter, but also of time because of the relationship between them. There is no such thing as a time before the universe was created. Now, sometimes we colloquially talk about that sometimes and use those terms, but it's technically not correct to say that. There's no such thing as time before the universe because time, thanks to relativity we know, is intertwined within the universe, intertwined with space and matter. It's literally a nonsense statement to talk of time before time, time before the beginning of the universe. All right, so whatever you think caused the universe, all right, whether at this point, whether it was God, whether it was something else, all right, whatever it is timeless. It exists in some way, shape, or form outside the realm of time, outside the confines of time, all right? It does not live or exist in the way you and I do, where we exist, from one moment to another moment, and we talk about past, present, and future. Whatever caused the universe, to it or him, whichever we're going to talk about for right now, all time is just there. I mean, just present right in front of it at all points, so to speak. There's no such thing as being limited by past, present, and future for this particular cause, all right? So whether it was God or whether it was something else, it literally makes no sense to say who made it, because you don't need to be made, unless you have a beginning point. All right, look at the Kalam cosmological argument. If it didn't begin to exist, it doesn't need a cause. Whatever created or caused the universe in and of itself was outside of time. It did not have a beginning point. It did not begin to exist. So the question then becomes, is it fair then, knowing that this is whatever that entity was, whatever that thing was that caused the universe, it exists outside the universe, which means it can't be limited by time, it can't be limited by matter, and it can't be limited by space, because it made all of those things. All right? It created all of those things. Those things exist independent of whatever this cause is. So is it then a reasonable conclusion to say that that cause is God? In other words, if we look at the way the Bible describes God, can we say that God exists independently of all of those three things? Well, this is slide number 5. Let's look at them all individually. Number 1 Is God independent of matter? The physical matter is the physical stuff that makes up the universe, all right? And the answer is yes. John chapter 4, verse 24 says, God is spirit. In other words, immaterial, all right? And his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth, all right? So God, check number one. We got three things we're looking for, right? Matter, space, time. God has to be described in a way that shows he's independent and could be the cause of those three things. Matter, check. God is described as being immaterial. Number two, space. Is God described as being independent or not limited by space? Let's look at Psalm 139, verses 7 and 8. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. And this is what the theological term you'll hear sometimes is omnipresent. Omni meaning everywhere, present meaning present, right? God is present everywhere. You aren't present everywhere. I'm not present everywhere. Why? Because we're limited by space. We can only occupy one space at a time. I used occupy. We can only warp one area of space at a time, right? All right. That is not true of God. He is described as being everywhere. He is not limited by space. So, check number one, he's not limited by matter. Check number two, he's not limited by space. What about time? All right. And this is Psalm 90, verse 2. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, and then here's the key, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You will often hear God described as being eternal. Well, understand what that means. That does mean that he has existed through every point in time that we perceive as time, all right? But it means more than that. It means that God existed, we don't have a better word for it than say before, but like I already said, it's kind of a misnomer to say before time. But God did exist outside of that singularity, okay? And so when we say God is eternal, and a better term might be timeless, that doesn't mean he can't interact with us within time, but it means in his most fundamental nature, he is not confined by time. Why not? Because he made it. He invented time. I mean, he literally created time, all right? So now when we look back at the question, who made God? We realize that the simple answer to that is no one, because God is timeless. In order to need a maker, that means that if you were made, that means there was a point when you did not exist and a point when you did, or at least a point at which you began to exist, even if there was no time before that. All right, there's a point where we can point to, where we can look at and say, that's when you began. All right, but if the being is not within time, then there is no point where you can look at and say, that's when you began. There is no point when you can look to God and say, that's when God began, not the God of Christianity, all right? And what's really fascinating is, keep in mind, all of these scriptures I just read to you, and there's plenty more that describe these characteristics of God, these existed long before Einstein was born, all right? So well before anyone knew what general relativity was going to show about the nature of our universe, we already had revelation describing God as being immaterial, omnipresent, and timeless. All right, and then lo and behold, we look through, we come up through time, and Einstein formulates general relativity. And we do all these experiments, and we figure out that he's right, and we realize, oh gee, look, yet again, the way the Bible describes God is shown to be correct. That is what logically must be true about whatever the creator of the universe is. So that's the long answer. The short answer is, who made God? No one, because God's always existed. So he didn't need to have a creator. He didn't need to have a maker. But that's not true of the universe. We know the universe did need a maker. I'm going to close with one other logical illustration in case science isn't your bailiwick. It's not your thing. All right. And this is a little logical argument that shows there has to be what we call a first cause. There has to be, all right? Ultimately, if we go back in time and say, well, I see a leaf blowing on a tree, or a leaf moving on a tree. What caused that leaf to move? Well, it was this squirrel that jumped on the branch. Well, what caused the squirrel to jump on the branch? Because the squirrel saw a fox coming, so it ran up the tree. Well, what caused the fox to start running? Well, the fox was hungry and saw the squirrel. And you can go back in time and, by cause, and just trace back, what caused this, what caused this, what caused this. And that's creating what's called a causal chain, all right? A causal chain of events, all right? But in order for any chain of events to begin, to start moving, it has to have a starting point. If you keep going back in time and saying, what caused this, what caused this, what caused this, onto eternity, then that chain of causes never gets going. The mere fact that we've gotten to a result, that leaf blowing on the tree or that leaf moving on the tree, shows that at some point there must have been a first cause, a cause that in and of itself did not require a cause, that it is the ultimate cause of everything else. It is the one thing, it's the starting point of all of these chains of causal events that have gone throughout the universe. So if philosophy is your thing, there's your explanation. If philosophy, like most people except for me, I eat it up, I'm a geek. If philosophy is not your thing, then you can go back to the scientific explanation. They lead to the same conclusion. There must have been a cause of the universe that in and of itself did not require a cause of its own. All right? Anything to share or add, BA?
I was going to do a funny comparison of, I think it's the Greeks, talking about how men were chickens because they stand on two legs and don't have feathers. But I think the Brendan Fraser one was better.
You like my Brendan Fraser? Thank you for saying it right, too, by the way.
Yeah, no problem.
Because if you said it wrong, I would call you a liar for saying you knew all the time. Just saying.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, sorry again we couldn't do this live, but like I said, I'm not in the studio when we're supposed to be airing this, but we still did want to air an episode. If you do have any questions or comments about this, again, go ahead and put them in the comments section below. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And again, just by way of, if you do want to dive more deeply into this topic, go into our playlists here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. There is a playlist for the entire series of pocket-sized apologetics. There's also, I believe there used to be, I don't know if I deleted it or not, I think there used to be a playlist that was specifically just with the episodes about the Kalam Cosmological Argument. But if there's not, you can still find them all on that pocket-sized apologetics playlist. Those are short videos, usually about 5-6 minutes long a piece, that each just take one little pocket-sized tidbit and just try to answer that one at a time. But over the course of probably 20 episodes or more, I go through not just what the Kalam Cosmological Argument is, but a lot of the support for it, the rebuttals to it, and responding to some of those rebuttals, things like that. So if you want to know more about, and flesh this out a little bit more, I refer you to that. All right? That's all we got. I do believe what this episode, what's the date today? Today's, when we're filming, it's the 12th. So this is going to air on the 14th.
Yep.
14 plus 7 is 21.
21.
All right. So I do believe we're going to have an episode next week on the 21st. We will not have an episode on the 28th. All right. So people may have just assumed as much. But now you don't need to just assume. I'm telling you right now, there will not be an episode on the 28th. So next week will be our last episode of this year, and then we will see you all again next year. And if I forget to say it next week, we wish every single person out there a blessed and holy, very, very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. All right? Thank you, B.A.
Hey, no problem.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Pastor Ryan, for barging in and being quiet about it. And thank you all for watching, and we will see you all next week. God bless.